Just waiting for this confirmation to come up. We have confirmation now that the meeting is recording. So with your permission, Chair, I'll now take this adherent for the meeting of the Education Resources Committee of the 31st of August 2021. Councillor Allison, I see that you're here, as is Councillor Allison, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Cowie and Councillor Craig. Councillor Donnelly is also here, as is Councillor Dorman. I have apologies from Councillor Dryborough. Councillor Fagan is here, as is Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Harrow.
Apologies from Councillor Harrow.
Thank you. Councillor Horsham is here, as is Councillor Hose. Councillor Loudon is here. Councillor McAdams.
I'm here, Pauline.
Thank you. Councillor McCallan is here. Councillor Mars is here. Councillor Miller.
I'm here, thanks, Pauline.
Thank you. Councillor Nealon is here, as is Councillor Nugent. Councillor Razak. I see that you're here. Councillor Ross. Nothing from Councillor Ross. Councillor Scott, I see that you're here. I have apologies from Councillor Walker. Is anyone here substituting for Councillor Walker?
Morning, Pauline. Yes, Councillor Bert Thompson. I'm substituting this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wark.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Councillor Wark. And Councillor Watson, I see that you're here. Moving on to the external representatives, I have apologies from John Mulligan. I have apologies from Dr. Nagi Iskander. Gillian Coulter.
Hello, I'm here.
Thank you. Andy Harvey.
I'm present.
Thank you very much. Anne-Marie Hobson.
Apologies from Anne-Marie.
Thank you very much. Hilary Kirby.
I'm here.
Thank you. Christine Hall.
Here.
Thank you. There are a number of officers also present at the meeting, and with that, Chair, I'll hand back to you for the business of the meeting.
Chair, with your permission, Pauline, I've just had a phone call from Councillor Lockhart, who's can't get a connection. Could you maybe resend the connection to him so he can try again? I believe he's been having trouble in the last couple of days getting into me.
Thank you. While the Chair is going on with the business of the meeting, we'll arrange to have an invite sent to Councillor Lockhart. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks very much, Pauline, for going through that. Okay, so the usual rules apply, people. If you could keep yourself on mute for the sake of everything going smoothly, please. And I'll look out for hands up if anybody has a question or a comment as we go through. To kick off properly then, please, does anyone have a declaration of interest this morning? No, can't see any hands. Okay, thank you very much. Item 2 on the agenda is the minutes of our previous meeting, which was on the 1st of June. Your notes for this are on pages 5 to 14 of today's pack. Does anyone have any matters arising from the minutes? No, I propose we accept these minutes as a record of the last meeting.
Great, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Okay, everyone happy with that? We'll move on to our monitoring items this morning. Our first one is revenue budget monitoring. This is April of last year to March of this year, begins on page 15 of your pack. And Louise is going to take us through this morning. Good morning, Louise.
Good morning and thank you, Chair. So this is the first of 2 reports on the revenue budget for committee this morning, one covering the final outturn position for the resource for 2021 and the second covering the current position for the financial year 21-22. So on the first report, this provides information on the actual expenditure against the budget for the period 1st of April through to the 31st of March 2021 for education. And it's the final report to committee for this financial year and outlines the final outturn position in relation to our budget and the probable outturn It also outlines the final cost of COVID for the resource, and this position was part of the approved council position presented to the Executive Committee at the 23rd of June. So Section 4 outlines the position relative to the Scottish Attainment Challenge funding for PEF and SAC, and spend as at the 31st of March was 7.359 million, with 2.326 million still to spend, and that was being carried forward to meet commitments in the remaining school session for 2021 from April this year. In relation to SAC funding, actual spend at the end of the financial year was 1.928 million, and funding was received to cover this spend. Section 6 on page 16 outlines the main financial implications of the report, and the year-end position is an underspend of 9.457 million before approved transfers to reserves, and after the approved transfers to reserves, an overspend of 3.928 million. And if we remove the cost of COVID, this leaves an underspend of 32,000 for education's core budget position, and this is an improvement for what we thought from the probable outturn of 340,000, and that was reported earlier in the year. The total cost of COVID for the resource for 2021 was 8.133 million, and this was net expenditure of 8.493 million as outlined in Appendix B, and it reflects the additional expenditure for the education recovery teacher employed on a one-year fixed-term contract and the short-term supply, operation of the hubs for the key worker children back during the original lockdown, cost of sanitisation stations, PPE, cleaning materials and enhanced cleaning regimes for our schools and establishments. We also had the impact of loss of income of 516,000 and savings not achieved of 99,000. However, this was offset by unspent budget of 975,000, and in the main it related to the provision of breakfast and holiday lunch clubs and rates. So Section 6.4 outlines the funding for COVID for education, and the overall cost of COVID for education is funded via some specific grant, and that was received for the cost of teachers, digital inclusion and agency payments that we had to pay to our partners in relation to early years, and also transport providers. And this has been allocated to offset the costs in Appendix B for 4.463 million. The balance, however, is 4.030 million, and this is funded via the General Revenue Support Grant, and this is held corporately for education's cost of COVID, and this includes the cost of mobilisation, discretionary payments for the winter clothing, and further digital inclusion, as well as other miscellaneous costs of COVID. In relation to our core budget, we had an underspend of 32,000, and this reflects an underspend in various specific programmes, and funding of these has been put to reserve to meet the commitments going forward in the new financial year, and these are outlined at paragraph 6.5. These were approved at Executive Committee again on the 23rd of June. In relation to the core budget, there was an underspend primarily within our property costs relating to rates, and this was offset by costs in mainstream transport and ESN transport, external placement and teacher salaries as a result of pupil growth. We also have our standard budget variants, and these reflect the movements in education's budget from the period from the 26th of February through to the end of the financial year at the 31st of March. And these cover transfers to and from reserves in relation to capital, and budget variants to reflect year-end accounting, but budget upload to reflect how we've delivered our services, and the realignment of budget to reflect our EMA payments and our devolved management environment in schools. So a committee, if we can read back to paragraph 2, committee is asked to approve the following recommendations: that the education outturn position at the 31st of March of an overspend of 3.928 million after the approved transfers to reserves be noted, and that this is COVID related and is funded corporately as part of the overall council position, and that proposed budget variants be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Louise, for going through this first revenue paper this morning. Does anyone have any comments or questions just now? Can't see any. Okay, we're happy to accept the report.
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay, we're moving on to second revenue budget monitoring report today, and this is from the period April to July of this year. So this is monitoring item 4 on page 21, and Louise is going to take us through this again. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you. So the second report for committee today, and this is the most up-to-date information in relation to our revenue budget for the new financial year. So it covers the period 1st of April to the 16th of July, which is period 4 of the year. As our first report, we're reporting to committee for the financial year and outlines specific costs incurred in relation to the COVID response, our resources COVID response to date. It is an early report for education, obviously doesn't reflect the new session from August just yet. So in relation to paragraph 4 at page 21, this contains updated information in relation to the Scottish Achievement Challenge funding. For PEF, our total budget now is 12.235 million. And this represents the 2.326 million, which is the carry forward from 2021, which I mentioned in the previous report. The actual allocation for 21-22, which is 8.617 million. And in addition, schools have been allocated a further 1.292 million for 21-22 as part of the PEF premium. And this was calculated as a further 15% of their 21-22 allocation and is used to support activities in schools through the recovery period. So in terms of where we are, spending commitment to date at the 16th of July is 3.317 million with 8.916 still to spend. And this reflects the staffing in schools from April to August. However, it doesn't yet reflect the staffing for the new session from the 12th of August, and that will be brought in through the next reporting periods. In relation to SAC, the budget for the year is 1.971 million and spend and commitment to date is 1.233 million. However, this does reflect all the staff costs that are known at the moment for the full financial year through to the end of March 22. So turning to the main financial implications of the report, paragraph 6.1 on page 22, this outlines the current position with an overspend of 174,000 against the phased budget. This overspend is COVID related and reflects costs of increased utilities due to the increased ventilation requirements within schools and also a reduction in their budgeted income from instrumental music and for nursery milk provision in the financial year to date. There is no variance in education's core budget. So we're showing it a bit differently this year. The specific grant funding has been received, as you know, for education recovery, and 9.166 million of this, as well as the council's investment in education learning recovery of 2.245, has been brought into the budget, shown at 11.361 million for the year. And this is outlined in Appendix B, and this represents direct funding received for recovery and is used to offset some of education's costs of COVID, given the scale and the specific nature of the funding. So there is a further specific grant of 3.6 million available for the financial year at the time of reporting, and this has been held centrally and will be allocated to the resource as required when expenditure is confirmed later in the year as projects start to commence. This presentation allows the cost of recovery and the funding received to be reported in the one place, and this position does not include the recently reported additional teachers for education from August 21, and again this will be shown in later reports. So we have our the specific grant environments to bring in the COVID funding, and we have our standard budget environments, which again cover the period 1st of April through to the 16th of July. There's quite a few of these. These cover our transfers to reserves to meet our expenditure commitments, transfers to capital for IT, also the creation of budget to reflect external income, and this includes the SAC programme, clothing grants, summer programmes, the temporary restriction funds for early years, the milk and healthy snack, and also our PEF premium. Also realignment of budget to reflect how we deliver our services, and also the realignment of budget again within the devolved management scheme in schools and to reflect our EMA payments. So if I can refer committee back to paragraph 2, committee is asked to approve the following recommendations: that an overspend of 174,000 at the 16th of July on education's revenue budget be noted, and this is wholly COVID related, and that the proposed budget environments again be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Louise, for going through that paper. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this second revenue paper? Well, I can see. Okay, we're happy to accept.
Agreed.
Great.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Louise, for your input. Okay, we now have 2 capital budget monitoring papers. The first one covers periods April last year to March this year, begins on page 27 of your pack, and Lorraine O'Hagan's going to take us through this. Morning, Lorraine.
Morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. This agenda item then looks, as the Chair said, at the final position for the capital budget for education resources for last financial year. So it takes us from the 1st of April right the way through to the end of March and ties into the figures that were reported to the Executive Committee back in June, being the year-end position for the Council. So Section 4 gives you the background and explains the budget position for the year. And the main point to note is the budget didn't change from the 24.480 that we reported back to this committee in June, which was the period 12 budget at that point. Section 4 gives the final outturn position, with Section 4.1 detailing the budget of 24.480 and Section 4.2 showing the final spend for the year of 22.641. Section 4.3 explains that the final spend for the year up to the 31st of March is slightly higher than we had projected back at period 12, and that's due to good progress made on the early years 1140 hours programme as we got towards the end of the financial year. The majority of the overall underspend is in relation to the timing of spend across a number of projects within the resource where the budget's required in 21-22 rather than in 2021, and that's just tipping over the end of the financial year. The 21-22 position will be picked up in the next report that I'll take you through. Section 4.6 explains the year-end accounting adjustments that we make to the capital programme to ensure that the treatment of spend complies with accounting regulations. So this is the contra side to Louise's paper. So this is an accounting entry only and is to make sure that all spend is categorised correctly as either revenue or capital from an accounting perspective. So Section 4.7 of your paper, explains that from reviewing the Council's revenue and capital spend for education resources at the end of the year, £56,000 of capital spend had to be recorded as revenue, and conversely £520,000 of revenue spend was recorded as capital. These transfers mean that for the purpose of our publishing our published annual accounts only, there's capital spend of £23.105 million for the resource. So if I can refer committee back to the recommendations in Section 2, and that's ask the Resource Committee to note the budget of 24.480 and the final spend for the year of 22.641. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. Any comments or questions on this first paper? Not that I can see, we're happy to accept.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, moving on to item 6, and this is capital budget monitoring from April to July this year, and Lorraine's going to present this as well. Thanks, Lorraine.
Thanks, Chair. So again, as Chair said, this is the new year budget then for the resource. It's the first report for this financial year, and it takes us to the 16th of July, which is our accounting period 4. So Section 3 of your report provides the background and advises that the budget of 20.4 million is the approved budget that was agreed by Executive Committee back on the 23rd of June. Section 4 details the capital programme update for the current year with a breakdown in the appendix to your report. And Section 4.1 notes that the anticipated spend to date was 3.328 million, with the spend to 16th of July amounting to 3.119 million. And again, it's a timing issue only. We are 209,000 behind profile, and it's really in relation to timescales on a few of the remaining early years 1140 hours projects. As I mentioned in the old year report, to comply with accounting rules, we need to look at where we've classified our spend. So 700,000 of capital money has been transferred from revenue into the capital programme. So we're classing it as capital spend, and that's included in the programme that we've got of the £20.4 million. I'd just be looking to refer committee back to the recommendations in Section 2 and ask that committee note the £20.4 million budget and the spend to the 16th of July, which is 3.328 million. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lorraine. Any comments or questions on this one? None that I can see. Happy to accept the paper.
Chair.
Oh, Councillor Allison, thank you. Thanks, Pauline.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. One of the things that's happened recently is a significant increase in the cost of materials, and occasionally we're hearing that there is a supply problem for many of these things. Can you tell us what actions are being taken to mitigate that risk within the Council, and if there is any work being done to evaluate whether we can delay projects because of cost increases, or whether we are going to go for an increased you're going to ask for an increased budget so that we can keep planned projects on track?
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, we've noted those points in our Executive Committee report that went last week, and it's exactly highlighting exactly what you've said. We have been experiencing some delays. We've been experiencing some contract price increases. So across the different resources, I think within procurement and within the particular resources, for example, housing and technical resources, they're looking at different ways of trying to manage this and try to mitigate it. So, for example, within the procurement world, they're looking to try and award contracts, but with a tighter turnaround deadline. Terminology is maybe not quite right, but instead of giving a period of 30 days to agree the contract, they're bringing it forward so that we can actually limit the price risk in terms of the prices that were coming from the contractor. So we're trying to clamp down a little bit and give them less flexibility and give us more firm prices. Within the housing and technical world, they are looking at the projects that they're carrying out, and they might look to prioritise some projects over others. So, for example, if a project's primarily based on working using steel prices, steel in their pricing, then they might be looking to look at an alternative, or they'll maybe delay that project and concentrate on a project that maybe looks more based on timber, so they can actually manage between the different types of projects in order to try and mitigate the price increases that they're seeing in the marketplace. In terms of looking at whether or not we're coming back to members to look for more money, we're not at that situation yet. We're taking every project in its own merit, and I think again what we've noted in the Executive Committee report is that if we have any significant price increases, then we will bring them back to members for consideration when that's appropriate. But as I say, we're not at that point yet. We're still monitoring it and managing it as best we can at the moment.
Okay, thanks for that, Lorraine. Okay, Alex?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Apologies for that, for missing you. Any further comments or questions? I'm on a different view and I can't see any hands up, so I'm going to take it that we're all happy. We're going to accept this report.
Agreed, Chair.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Okay, item 7 then, we're on to workforce monitoring. This is the period April to June of this year, begins on page 35 in your pack, and Eileen McPake's going to take us through this. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the standard workforce monitoring report for education resources covering the period April to June 2021. So section 4.1 outlines the attendance statistics for committee, and the details are in Appendix 1. Absence rate for the resource for June 2021 was 3.5% compared to a council-wide figure of 4.7%. which has decreased by 0.9 compared to the previous month, and compared to the last year, the figure has increased by 2.2. The overall council-wide absence as at the 28th of June was 4.05%, and 0.41% of that related to COVID absence. So all of this information translates to a projected annual average figure for the resource for 2021 of 3.7% compared to a council-wide figure of 4.5%. Section 4.2 to 4.5, the details are in Appendix 2, and the main points are, during the period, there was 465 occupational health referrals, there was 6 disciplinary hearings, no grievances and no dignity at work issues were raised. There was 236 accidents or incidents recorded during the period. There was 32 leavers, and of them 25% of them completed exit interviews. Section 4.7 details vacant posts during the period and gives a breakdown. So 77 employees left during the period, and managers indicated that 72 of those vacancies would be filled. 2 were ended to a fixed term contract. There was 1 post transferred to another budget, and 2 posts were held pending a review within the service. So I would refer committee back to section 2 and ask that the recommendation be approved that the workforce monitoring information for April to June 2021 for education resources be noted.
Thank you very much. Thanks for going through that. Do we have any comments or questions on workforce monitoring? I can see Bert, please, Councillor Thompson. Morning, Bert.
Good morning, Chair. Thanks very much. Just briefly, I think it's a big thanks to our teachers encouraging that their absentee rates are fairly bit lower than council-wide. So I recommend a good recommendation to teachers there under all the difficult circumstances. So please pass my thanks on. Thank you.
Thanks, Bert. Thank you. Councillor Nealon, please. Morning, Lynn.
Morning. Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking through the figures, and obviously last year was a very unusual year all round. So last year's figures are actually quite skewed. They're very, very low. So it's quite difficult to get a comparison. And I was just wondering if, I'm just going to pick one at random, violent physical incidences. 37 last year, 217 this time round. If we sort of disregard last year's figures, what kind of number is 217 on the scale of things? So, for example, 2019, what was the number for violent physical incidents in 2019 to give us some kind of reasonable comparison?
I can certainly provide you with the figures. I don't have them in front of you, but you're right. In terms of comparing to last year, it was a very different context. I would say as well, we've changed our reporting requirements. So the numbers might be slightly increased because there was a delay to some of the incidents being recorded. But I can certainly get all that background for you so that you've got a reasonable comparison.
Thank you. Would you circulate that to everybody, please?
Of course I can. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Eileen. I think we're going to see that across all resources, understandably, for the next wee while. It's going to be quite difficult to make comparisons or say what a normal year has been in terms of figures and so on. But more information we can get for elected members, the better on that. So thank you for that offer. If there's no further comments or questions on this, are we happy to accept the report?
Great, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, moving on, we've got a couple of items for decision. I'm just going to quickly double check. I think there's been a few gremlins in the system this morning, and I'm not sure that Lynn Sherry's been able to join us for item 8 so far.
Just with you, Chair, the current situation is that IT are working with Lynn, hopefully to get her back online, but it's not happening at the moment.
Okay. Right, so sorry, I was just scrolling there. If Anne Donaldson is there just now, Anne, would you be happy to skip to item 9 just now and we could come back to 8 just to see, just in case we can get Lynn back online? And if not, I believe Tony McDade has offered to cover her item. Just keep everyone on their toes then. We're jumping ahead to page 47, if that's okay with you, Anne. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So, agenda item number 9, as you said, starts on page 47. The purpose of this report is to advise committee on the proposed extension of the Pathfinder initiative to support care experienced children and young people and those on the edges of care, together with proposed staffing arrangements and governance structure. Section 3 describes the background to the report, and paragraph 3.1 describes how, as part of the Learning Recovery report noted at the previous Education Resources Committee in June, a range of programmes and activities were identified in order to support learners in their recovery, including extension of the Pathfinder initiative. The Pathfinder pilot was established in the Cambuslang and Rutherglen locality in April 2019, and this was in response to the need for an early intervention approach to achieve better outcomes for children and their families living in the locality. Importantly, as stated in paragraph 3.3, support is provided holistically across the settings of school, community and the home. Paragraphs 3.5 and 3.6 describe the staffing and governance model. Section 4 describes the current position and range of approaches used by staff in relation to the initiative. Notably, there have been 238 engagements with young people and their families at the time of writing the report. And paragraph 4.1 details some of the reasons for referrals to Pathfinders, including poor school attendance, poverty and financial concerns, offending in the community, use and impact of drugs and alcohol, and health and well-being concerns. Section 5 describes the positive impact of the initiative, and paragraph 5.2 makes reference to the research that's been carried out in relation to the impacts and benefits of the project, with the report detailing the research findings attached at Appendix 1. It should be noted that the research programme revealed an extremely positive evidence base for the contribution of the Pathfinder team in each of the 3 schools in influencing improved life trajectories of vulnerable young people and also improving partnership working. I would also ask members to note some of the unintended consequences of the project, which are detailed in paragraphs 5.3 to 5.5, including a further £10,000 secured to combat holiday hunger and featured by YouthLink Scotland, and a further £18,000 of grant funding, which was distributed directly to families. Section 6 describes work that has taken place to support the rollout of the Pathfinders initiative across the 4 localities, and paragraph 6.5 details the proposed staffing and governance structure, with employee implications detailed in 7.1 and financial implications detailed in paragraph 8. I would ask members to note that the continuation of the current programme will be funded from Learning Recovery Funds and the Care Experience Attainment Allocation, with extension of the programme funded from targeted learning recovery central funding and PEF and SAC commitments from participating schools. Paragraph 8.3 details the potential contributions for each of the periods October 21 to March 22, April 22 to March 23 and April 23 to August 23. Turning back then to the recommendations at 2.1, committee is asked to approve that the content of the report be noted, that the extension of the Pathfinder initiative is approved, with the posts detailed at section 6 added to the establishment, and that the research findings showing the impact and benefit of the Pathfinder initiative at Appendix 1 be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you for going ahead and swapping around there. I've got a question from Councillor Nealon, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's not really a question. I'd just like to say, reading through this, I really welcome this initiative. I'm a great believer in early intervention and sort of stopping problems upstream rather than dealing with larger ones downstream. I do think it's early days yet to see proper impact, and I do look forward to seeing the outcome of this in coming years, and thanks to all involved. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comments, Councillor. I've got Councillor Cowie. Good morning, Margaret.
Morning, Katie. I don't know what's happened to my camera. It's not letting me take it off. I'd just like to welcome this report. I have had some involvement with the sort of Pathways team due to having care experienced youngsters in my care. Absolutely fantastic the work they're doing, and I've spoken to other families. Just all good things. And I really welcome it and them rolling it out to other places. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks very much, Margaret. Thank you. If there's no further questions, then it's an item for decision. I propose we accept the recommendations in 2.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, if there's no further questions, if you haven't had a chance to read the research findings, then please do. It's really some fantastic work in there, and best of luck to people who'll be taking up the posts as well. Thanks very much, Shan. Okay, we're going to go back to item 8. As far as I can see, I don't think Lynn has been able to join us. Maybe if you could confirm that, Pauline.
She's not been able to join us yet. I'm going to try and re-invite her to the meeting.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much. I think there's a fair few gremlins going on this morning. Tony, would you be okay to go back to item 8 then? But thank you very much. So we're going back to item 8, everyone, which begins on page 43. This is another item for decision on the acquisition of nursery modular units. Goodness, that's difficult to say. I should have practiced that one. Thanks very much, Tony. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. No problem at all. As everybody will see, the purpose of the report is to seek approval for the acquisition of the nursery module units at St John the Baptist Primary School. In section 3, we outline the background. We've had them since 2013. It's been a renewable lease up until this point. It's a process that we're familiar with across the school estate. This is not unique to St John the Baptist itself. We originally used them for the decant situation with Muir Edge Primary School and to try to utilise it for the nursery class there as well. But as members will be aware, we have experienced growth. We've had the 1140 implementation, and we've also experienced growth in particular localities, this being one of them. And it's really about trying to utilise the existing school estate that we have as well. In 3.2, we outline the council that we did make inquiries right in the outset about purchasing the rental units, but Portakabin had said it was within the context of a lease, but that position has now changed, as you will see later on in the paper. The proposal is for us to undertake some significant alterations to those modular units on site, if that agreement is reached today, with the ownership then passing to the council itself, and that allows us to be in a position to upgrade. And we look at the specification of that, and obviously, as I say, we have done that before. We've been fortunate we've done that with St Bride's and Bothwell, and we can see the implications for that. That includes looking at a sympathetic design to the existing school, looking at insulation standards, a sloping roof, and some internal alterations just to make sure it's fit for the curriculum and for the children themselves. Section 3.4 outlines the cost of what the 5-year rental agreement would be, and also what the cost of now selling the purchase price of £125,000 excluding VAT, and the lease could be terminated, of course, at any point in time is also what 3.4 outlines. Section 4 looks at the options appraisal that we carried out in order to do that. We'd obviously looked at a completely different build, but that the complications of that are not just the build, it's also about a decant situation to the children. The scenario of renewing the lease of the initial lease would be £90,960 excluding VAT. However, the council at the end of the lease period would be back in the same position as we are at the moment as well, and would be required to a lease agreement, purchase the units or build a new facility, an identical scenario, or indeed purchase the modular units. And you will see the paper today that is the recommendation, because we believe that's in terms of best value and indeed the continuity for early learning childcare. You can see that it also provides us with a revenue saving of £18,000 per annum. It allows us to undertake alterations and put the building to an appropriate standard and upgrade it as well. And we do have funding in the capital programme that would allow us in order to do that as well. And so you can see in 5.2 that we do ask for today to be considered the recommendation that the modular units from Portakabin are purchased at the price, and that is funded within the context of the 1140. Here, if I can take you back in the committee back to recommendations 2.1 and ask that they be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you for taking us through that. Does anyone have any comments or questions? I see Councillor Scott. Morning, Graham.
Morning, Chair. Thank you so much, and many thanks to Tony for filling in for Lynn at very short notice. Obviously, I support this item absolutely, but I want to look at some of the underlying problems here. Obviously, St John the Baptist. Am I right in saying, Tony, that a good number of a high percentage of the school roll at St John the Baptist comes from North Lanarkshire, View Park? And obviously there's a financial burden on us by doing this. Are we getting any extra money from North Lanarkshire as a contribution towards this? Or is this, I know there's a standard charging facility between local authorities. Are we, to facilitate for this, are we upping our charge to North Lanarkshire? Because obviously we're taking on the expense for a good number of children that are coming down from View Park and crossing the boundary into South Lanarkshire. And also, are there other pressures from within South Lanarkshire? Seeing in fact, the chair will know this, from the Cambus Lang end towards primary schools in Uddingston. But certainly, predominantly, it's the North Lanarkshire situation. If Tony, if you can address that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Scott. You make an important point. I would maybe make a distinction, though, that some of the joint catchment activity and some of the placing requests from St John the Baptist are mainly at primary school. We don't have a catchment activity at early years. We need the facility in the area for the children of South Lanarkshire. That's a predominant number of children in that area itself, and of course we have a priority. So elected members will remember that we come to the committee with a series of priorities and our admissions policy. So this is in the context of our children within South Lanarkshire. Also, for reassurance, there is a cross-border and boundary charging arrangement in terms of the revenue costs. So there's a cross-border activity for any children that do come that do come to us from North Lanarkshire, or indeed we have children and young children from Glasgow and some of our others, or indeed East Renfrewshire if you're across in East Kilbride. So we have a pretty mixed bag. I think the positive thing is the uses required for our children, irrespective of whether or not we have some children from North Lanarkshire, which we would take if we have spaces, because that's the way in which we utilise those spaces. And as I say, there is a cross-boundary charge that goes along with that. This is a specific situation to the area. There's no pressure other than families don't always quite, because we don't do it in catchment scenario, families will not always stick to that local area, maybe where Gran stays or a care provider that stays in the local community. So it's not quite as full as that, but the pressure is around the very local area.
Excellent. Okay, Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Allison.
Yeah, through you, Chair, Tony. Yeah, I've no concerns regarding the actual what you're actually looking to do here. It's more about the financing of it. You've identified that this is going to be capital expenditure rather than revenue. We've already heard today about the pressures that the capital budget are going to come under, and yet you've stated that there is quite clearly sufficient funds in the capital budget. I take it that is before we take into consideration any of the expected price increases that we are going to have to be challenged with. And secondly, the revenue budget will now have, I think you said, £18,000 per year that it's not allocated. What happens to those funds? Is the overall budget reduced, or is this freeing up expenditure for other activity within education?
Thanks, Chair. I suppose you're, again, and probably Lorraine covered that, as part of the monitoring of our capital projects. The funding is part of the 1140 activity, and it's an enhancement of the existing facility. But you're quite right, we need to look at the programme management of that, and that's done with our College and Housing and Technical Resources. They do monitor any of those price costs and that, and again with College and Finance around the procurement. So that is important, and we will continue to do that. There is, like all of these things, it's not showing yet, but we do monitor it, and we would, if there was any significant issues, obviously we'd report it that at other committees as well. In terms of the £18,000, we welcome any use of that money, but obviously within the context of 1140, if you remember in previous papers, this year for the additional revenue costs for 1140 as we've implemented it has been £32 million of additional costing. 18,000, I wouldn't be underestimating the significance of any cost. So £18,000 helps with the kinds of cost pressures of the full implementation of 1140. Thank
you very much, Tony. Okay, I think Councillor Scott and Councillor Allison, you've still got your hands up. If you could take those down unless you want to come back in, please. Thank you. No further comments or questions on this that I can see. This is an item for decision, so I propose we accept the recommendations at section 2.
Second, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter. Everyone agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving on to items for noting now, please, everyone. First one begins on page 67 on your pack, and this is on the alternative certification model that was in place for the exam diet, and Stuart Nicholson is going to take us through this. Good morning, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Good morning to the committee. The purpose of this report is to provide an overview of the National Alternative Certification Model, or the ACM as it's known, in relation to the preparation of provisional awards for SQA candidates following the cancellation of the 2021 SQA exam diet. Of course, those provisional awards were accepted by SQA and became the candidates' final awards. I'd note from the outset that much of the work that was undertaken had to be undertaken reactively in response to the changing public health context, and that in turn gave rise to uncertainty, disruption, and I have to say a most unfamiliar educational landscape alongside the unfamiliar social landscape we were operating in. Nevertheless, collectively, we were able to deliver a positive set of qualifications for candidates in South Lanarkshire this year. Section 3 of the paper sets out the key elements of the timeline. We note the October announcement of the cancellation of National 5 examinations, and that prompted the establishment of a national group, the NQ21, National Qualifications 21 group, to develop an alternative certification model. And that was undertaken on the premise that awards would be based on teachers' professional judgments of demonstrated pupil attainment, which would be supported by robust assessment evidence. It was later announced in December 2020 that the higher and advanced higher exams would also then be cancelled, and the ACM for National 5 was adapted to allow for those awards to be made following the same principles. Given the time of year, most schools had already undertaken a fair amount of work. They'd planned for their higher and advanced higher prelim diets, and those are normally undertaken in January and February. And those prelims were expected to form a significant element of that robust evidence to support the awards process. However, that was thrown into disarray somewhat by the announcement of the national lockdown in early January prior to the schools returning. And as a note in 3.6, the issue was compounded because there was no way at that time really of predicting or knowing when young people would be able to return in order to undertake the assessment to generate that evidence. And at that stage, actually there was a potential for the unthinkable to happen, that we might not have awards at all. Some immediate steps were taken, and I note in 3.7 that the NQ21 group and the SQA took immediate steps to provide some mitigation and initially to plan for what might happen. Fortunately, we were able to return in a phased way prior to the spring break. Some young people were able to come back into school buildings, and teachers were then able to complete course requirements and assessments to allow those awards to be made. But we do recognise that this was an extraordinarily difficult time for candidates and for teachers, and we commend all concerned for the resilience and for the commitment in getting through that very difficult period. Section 4 goes on then to describe the collaborative approach to making the model work in South Lanarkshire for our own young people. We developed guidance for schools in consultation with our head teachers and also working closely with our teacher unions. We built capacity by convening subject networks to support our schools and as a vehicle to support moderation activity across South Lanarkshire, and in the case of some subjects across the West Partnership as well. That allowed the feedback from a national sampling exercise to be used to support the consistent application of the national standards at subject level in all of our schools. Schools in the central South Lanarkshire education team undertook, if you like, a sense-checking activity to explore any unusual or unexpected results as they emerged, and in such cases, we tried to find further evidence to support the pupil results, and in some cases we also brought in SQA appointees to review pupil evidence to ensure that the awards were based on the young person's actual demonstrated attainment. As part of the national exercise, the Inspectorate undertook a review of local authority approaches, talking to the central team, to head teachers and SQA coordinators, and talking to some of our teachers and our union representatives. And a note in 5.2 that our approach was commended at that time. As part of that approach, schools were encouraged to have ongoing dialogue, not only with young people about their progress, but also with their parents and families, and that's noted in Section 6. The intent really was to ensure no surprises for young people or their families come exam day. So all candidates were informed of the grades to be submitted on their behalf prior to the summer break. And it's worth noting that the level of appeals and actually the number of complaints and concerns raised at that time was low. That was an encouraging early sign, and that early indication that the awards were seen to be fair generally was supported by the outcomes that were achieved. At the time of writing, we anticipated that pass rates and levels of award would be as good as or better than previous years, and indeed that's been borne out in Para 7.2, gives an indication of some of the reasons for that as we see it. Section 8 does note that where young people were unhappy with the results they achieved for any reason, that they were given the right to appeal directly to SQA this session, and that's the first time that that's happened. I have to say our schools do report relatively low levels of appeals compared to previous sessions, and that is a pattern that's reflected nationally. In terms of this current session, we do recognise that we have another somewhat uncertain year ahead. The central planning assumption is that the exam diet will go ahead as normal in April and May of 2022. However, you won't be surprised to hear that contingency measures are in preparation in the event of any change to that plan. Para 9 notes that the SQA has confirmed amendments to national qualifications for this session to start to take into consideration potential disruption. Chair, I'd want to close by saying that we will continue to build on the work done last session around subject networks and understanding standards. We'll continue to work with our teachers and with our schools to support the delivery of the national qualifications in 2022, whatever the circumstances that we face at that time. I recognise that our schools have risen to the substantial challenges they faced last year and the year before, and I'm confident that they will do so again this year coming. I would refer committee to the recommendation in section 2 and ask that the alternative certification process for SQA awards for candidates presented in session 2020-21 be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I've got a few questions, a few comments just now. I've got Councillor Nealon, then followed by Councillor Hamilton, please. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. This last year also has been really difficult for everybody, and commendations to the teaching staff and the pupils for the hard work, flexibility and resilience. I'm relieved to hear that there's a contingency plan in case this happens again, but something has been brought to my attention by parents. While the assessments were underway in the schools, some schools allocated study leave to the pupils and other schools did not. In the contingency plan for next year, would there be scope for maybe standardising that, or is that going to be left to each individual school's discretion? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nealon, and I think it's an important point to recognise that schools last year, given the circumstances, undertook a variety of approaches to the work that was needing to be done, and again it was done at short notice and in difficult circumstances, but I do appreciate that caused, I suppose, a compare and contrast approach for young people across different areas. What we will be looking to do this year, the fundamental principle or the planning assumption is that the exam diet will progress as normal, and on that basis then all of the normal arrangements for study leave and so on would be in place. I guess the answer to the second part of that question will depend on when we know what's happening. If there's an early call, then we're in a better position to have discussion across the schools and to perhaps try and ensure a wee bit more of a consistent approach. If we're left at the last minute, then I think we'll be going back to look at individual school circumstances and the factors that will impact on those types of decisions. For example, how much assessment has already been carried out, which particular subject areas have which particular gaps left, and I guess it will also depend on any further information from SQA about the sorts of adjustment or amendments that they might want to put into place. So at this point in time, I'm afraid it's a fairly vague answer. What we will be trying to do, though, is use this time to look ahead to make sure that we are better prepared for what's coming, given that on the basis of previous experience, the worst things will happen at the worst possible time, and that's where I guess where we'll start our planning.
Thanks, Stuart. Everly optimistic, that last comment. Thank you. Councillor Hamilton. Morning, Lindsay.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks very much, Stuart, for that report. It was really useful, and just like to take the opportunity to congratulate the young people on the results. And I suppose if you didn't get the results that you were quite expecting, like pretty sure none of us expected to be sitting here. So there's no wrong path, is it? The hashtag is. So really well done in the circumstances that they're in. I would just there's two questions actually, just one coming up from Lynn's last comment about when are you, I think it was October last year, was it not, that the initial planning was done on the exams? I'm just wondering if there's any indication from the government on when you'll have an idea for this year. Or ever-changing picture, obviously, consider even today or next week could be different. And also just on the appeals, I note that it was they're lower this year, in that it was up to the pupil to put in the appeal. So I was just wondering if you think they're lower because of that, or do you think they're lower for another reason? Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, Councillor Hamilton. I think important questions, particularly around the decision making and the timescales. Essentially, the decision around whether the exams will go ahead or not will be taken at government level. So the Cabinet Secretary will make that decision based on the advice, I guess, from Health. What is currently happening is the NQ21 group has, I think, potentially had a name change because we're now into, of course, the 22 session, but the contingency planning is in place, and both Tony and myself are directly involved, Tony in the NQ group and me in the working group which is taking on the quality assurance processes associated with that. So I can confirm that we are now planning for both the progression towards an exam diet, the potential for a modification to the exam diet should there be public health restrictions in place, or indeed what we would do in the event that the diet had to be cancelled, whether that was short-term or long-term. So the real problem we have here is, in the absence of any real good predictive information about what's going to happen with the virus, we are having to plan for all potential scenarios, and I know, Chair, that I do sound like ever the optimist. We work on the basis that we're hoping for the best, but we are planning for the worst, and we'll take it on that basis. The question around appeals is an interesting one. I think for really in that very difficult period in the run-up to exams, the communication with young people, the quality of feedback around the assessments, the support that they had, the discussions with parents, where we began to see that a young person might be disappointed in terms of the results they might have hoped for at the start of the year compared to what it was looking like. We were in a much better position in schools to work with them on a, if you like, that plan B, that no wrong path, to undertake some of that activity. We were also in a position to review wider evidence to see if we could do more to support, or to support the, if you like, a more optimistic presentation. So all of that work was done very closely with the young person and very closely with the parents. So there was no kind of surprise outcomes. So, for example, a young person who thinks they're doing okay goes into the exam and sometimes gets a really bad result, and that's a hard disappointment. I think the nature of the internal assessment and the fact that the grades submitted by schools were the grades that the young people got took away some of that kind of final anxiety, if you like. And I think where there were appeals, what we're seeing, it's on the basis of questioning the academic judgment, or a sense that something wasn't quite right, rather than that fundamental sense of disappointment. I think that the communication and the support for young people to make sure that they had that direct right of appeal, I don't think that would have suppressed the results, suppressed the number. I think it would be more likely had there been a higher sense of disappointment as we found last year. It's something that we're mindful of, obviously, moving forward, and the SQA is planning for what comes next too.
Great. Thank you very much, Stuart. I should say we I'm sure speak for us all. We say we appreciate your pragmatism and the breadth and depth of planning for all scenarios that has taken place over the past year and beyond. I've got Councillor Allison, please.
Thanks, Chair. Association issue, Stuart. SQA, as far as I'm aware, has been deemed to be closed down by the Scottish Government, and a new organisation put in its place. Have we a timescale for that? And secondly, has there been any communication with councils from the Scottish Government as to what we believe is required for the new organisation to be an improvement on the SQA, or is it simply being done centrally without any discussion, basically at school level?
Thanks, Councillor Allison, for that. And that's actually something which is included in a paper I'm going to present shortly during the course of the meeting. But yes, in short, the SQA is going to be replaced in terms of the qualifications awarding body in Scotland, and a new organisation will be established. And as I'll say later, that Professor Ken Muir has been appointed to lead on that. I would be very surprised if that was done without discussion and consultation with local authorities and a range of other stakeholders to make sure that we absolutely get this right next time around.
Great, thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you, Alec. No further comments or questions on this I can see just now. Are we happy to accept the recommendations in the report?
Agreed, Chair.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Right, given that that's just gone 11 on the top of the hour, I would suggest that we have a break just now before the next item. So that will be for 5 minutes just now, please. So refill your copies, have a stretch, and we'll see you again in 5. Thanks, everyone. On to another item for noting just now, which is item 11. This begins on page 73 of your pack, and this is an...
Chair, through you, I'll just start the recording again.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
still
Pauline.
recording. No, that's absolutely fine.
Forgot that
Recording
finished.
again, just to
Thank
remind
you.
members that we are recording. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you.
And we are recording, so we can continue.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, back to item 11, everyone. So this was on page 73, and this is for to give us an interim update just now on the sensational summer session provision, which ran over the summer. And Tony McDade is going to take us through this just now. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks very much, Chair. The purpose of the report is to provide an interim update on the delivery of our own South Lanarkshire summer sessions, and also the provision of the Scottish Government funded enhanced summer programme that we ran during the summertime itself. You'll see in section 3.1 that we presented a paper to committee, the June committee, outlining the plans for our continuation of our own summer programme and the welcome provision of additional enhanced experiences in line with the Scottish Government Get Into Summer funding, where we were able to extend our offer to families who were disproportionately affected during the pandemic period. The provision itself allowed us to offer a sensational summer sessions programme that included 12 to 17-year-olds for this year, and we had additional support from the voluntary sector and partners in the local community, as well as our youth family community learning service, and that was over 6 days a week, and it included some weekends and evenings as well. In section 3.3, you'll see that we also had 83 projects funded externally. That was from a range of community organisations and partners, and that delivery was to over 2,500 children and young people. This is an initial overview within the report itself, and obviously we'll look at a full evaluation process, and we're doing that right now, and that's happening as we speak, and we'll bring that to a future committee, and that's obviously within the context of a report that we write to the Scottish Government as well on the basis of their ask of us. You'll see in section 4 we try to highlight again some of the practice that went on about the 14 clubs that we organised ourselves as a council, and also relied on some partner agencies such as the Mackin Trust, Hippie and Healthy Valleys, and the Terminal 1 team as well, to support our own provision and enhanced provision itself. That was in primary age children, and targeted for a number of reasons, including free school meals, living with mental health, isolation, bereavement, anxiety. And we used, if you remember in June time, we said we would work with our schools to try to identify some children and young people within the community that would benefit from the engaging interest, and that was what happened. We also approached other organisations. We made links to kinship families to make sure we were targeting some of our approaches as well, and we were able to build on some of the practice that we've had from a number of years. And you'll see in section 4.5 that I have outlined, we were lucky that we have a number of other organisations who support us in our own delivery activity as well. Section 4.8 and 4.9 outline a range of the activities. Again, during the course of the summer, there's a wide range of activity for our children and young people that were involved in those activities. And you can see it ranges from the climbing wall, our involvement of Scottish Fire and Rescue, the Dog Trust, and a wide range. I would also commend the activity of our Active Schools and our Leisure Trust team, who also supported some of the activity and who put in free personalised support. We were able to put in such as swimming passes or ice skating passes, access to tennis, outdoor learning, and other range of activities as well. We also try to have a wide opportunity for many children and young people, including, for example, STEM activities. In 4.14, you can see that we do say that the opportunity to engage with our third sector partners to deliver the enhanced programme was successful, we believe, and it supported delivery right at local community level. We will reflect that in our full evaluation report in November time, and that's the report for both committee and indeed to the Scottish Government around the funding itself, and to try to build on the types of activity that we've been involved in. 5.1 just gives you that sense of some of the feedback that we had received, and we felt that was important, that you could see some of that and the difference that's made. I was fortunate to go to a number of them, and that was certainly the feeling that as many of us during the course of the summer were able to see that in action as well. You'll see that we were funded, both were lucky to were funded within the council and indeed funding from the Scottish Government as well. Chair, if I could take the committee back to section 2.1 and for the committee to note the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I've got Bert with his hands up. Thanks, Bert.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Thanks for that report, Tony. I know in Blantyre the whole thing was well received and very well attended. Indeed, me and Mo queued up for an hour and then get told we were too old. Thank you.
I can picture the scene there. Thank you. Councillor Cowie.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say, I went into one of the sessions that were being facilitated by the Active Schools down in Spittal Primary. What a great time all the kids were having. It was really well attended. They were all getting stuck in. They were actually, the workers, they were great as well. And there was a huge benefit to the community of Spittal because the school was open, they were able to keep the mug open and kids for the area were able to use that. So that was a big plus. And I attended like several others throughout Rutherglen and Cambuslang, and it was absolutely brilliant the amount of stuff that was going on this summer for kids. You know, different stuff with the normal. So I welcome this report and I hope to see it back again next year. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Margaret. Councillor Donnelly. Thanks, Mary. Councillor Donnelly, I'm not sure if you're on mute.
Gremlins. I've got
right.
it.
That's you. We can hear you now.
Gremlins in the system there. Yeah, I also would like to welcome this report. And I know coming from my community in Hill House, the kids, they're going to get together and put wee reports in to show how much they enjoyed it. So that is really good coming forward. And I'm looking forward to that report coming from Hill House. But yeah, all the kids, because of the enhanced programme,
Sorry, Councillor Donnelly, you seem to have frozen.
So engage. Am I frozen? Can you hear me?
You're just coming and going, Councillor Donnelly.
Right. Okay, I just welcome it then. Okay, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks for your comments, Councillor Donnelly. Thank you. I can't see any further hands up just now, so thanks for this interim report just now, Tony, and we look forward to hearing more about it at a future committee. Thank you. Okay, everyone, moving on to item 12, which begins page 79 on your pack, and this is an update report on the attachment strategy, which Anne Donaldson's going to take us through. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on progress on the implementation of the attachment strategy for education resources and of the next steps to embed attachment-informed practice across the authority. Section 3 details the background to the report, and paragraph 3.3 describes how the Education Resources Attachment Strategy supports the action in the Children's Services Plan to provide staff training in attachment and trauma-based practice. The strategy promotes better experience of attachment for South Lanarkshire's children and young people. Paragraph 3.5 describes how attachment theory supports an understanding of early childhood trauma and the impact of loss, and also provides the foundation to fully understand the concept of adverse childhood experiences. Paragraph 3.7 explains that our attachment strategy supports the Scottish Government ambition of a trauma-informed and responsive workforce, where staff understand the impact of trauma and respond appropriately. Section 5 details the progress of the rollout and describes the range of activities that have taken place since the launch of the attachment strategy in June 2020. 5.4 and 5.7 make reference to leaflets and pledge cards which have been developed, and they've been made available to all staff. And I can inform members that copies have been left in the members' lounge area for you to have a look at the next time you're here at headquarters. So I hope that you enjoy those materials. A raft of training has been delivered and an evaluation report for the training is provided at Appendix 1. Notably, following Part 1 of the training, the evaluations illustrate that 99% of respondents agree that the attachment strategy would help young people in their school, and following Part 2, 100% of respondents agreed that the strategy would help young people in their school. When asked about important elements of the training, one staff member commented that helping all staff to understand that distressed behaviours require support and care and not discipline is important, and the importance of relationships and this being highlighted to all staff is key for understanding our young people. Section 6 details next steps, and members will note that an update on progress will be given to staff at the annual Inclusion Conference, which takes place on the 10th of September. Importantly, at this time, all establishments and services are asked to nominate attachment leads and ambassadors to progress and support the rollout of the strategy in their own school or establishment. Turning back then to the recommendations detailed at Section 2, the committee is asked to approve the following. To note that the progress on the implementation of the attachment strategy is in line with expectations despite the challenges of delivering during the period of the pandemic, and that next steps to further embed attachment-informed practice be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anne, for taking us through that. Does anyone have any comments or questions for Anne on this report? Not that I can see. Okay, happy to accept.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 13 then, please. This is on counselling through schools. It's an update report beginning on page 89, and Anne's going to take us through this as well. Thanks again, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the delivery of counselling through primary, secondary and special schools, and on the further guidance which has been developed for schools. Members are familiar with the background to this report, the subject of which follows the recommendations of the Children and Young People's Mental Health Task Force, which reported in July 2018. Paragraph 3.2 describes how, following on from these recommendations and as part of its mental health strategy, the Scottish Government has made available funding for the provision of access to counsellors through schools to pupils aged 10 and over. The principles underpinning the delivery of the counselling service are detailed in paragraph 3.3, and I'd highlight the following. Number 2, that the provision of counselling should be part of a holistic, child-centred approach to improving the mental health and wellbeing of children and young people. Number 3, that counselling services should be delivered within the COSCA definition of counselling by qualified counsellors registered with an appropriate body, and that services should ensure a robust assessment is carried out, and that young people are supported to access alternative services where counselling may not be appropriate. And 7, that the provision of counselling through schools should align to and or enhance local services to support the mental health and wellbeing of children and young people. Section 4 describes the continuum of support available within schools to support children and young people's wellbeing and emotional needs, and makes mention of the tiered model of intervention, referral processes, and importantly, in 4.2, involvement of the young person in specifying the appropriate support. Section 5 details the progress to date in terms of implementation of the service, and 5.2 details that there are currently 40 counsellors across the 10 counselling providers supporting 452 young people in 43 schools across South Lanarkshire. Paragraph 5.4 outlines some of the ways in which schools should work to raise awareness of the service within their establishment. Section 6 describes how the 10 providers have been selected, and that was following a robust procurement process to provide the service across South Lanarkshire, and these include sole traders, charities and larger companies who are all members of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. An evaluation of the service took place during May and June this year, and outcomes are described in Section 7. The detail of referrals were analysed and questionnaires were issued to children and young people, parents, carers and referrers. 7.2 offers some detail in relation to the initial analysis. So we can see that 89% of referrals were from school, 8% of young people self-referred, and 3% were referred by a parent or another agency. 68% identified as female, 30% identified as male, and 2% identified as non-binary or other or did not specify. The main reasons cited by children and young people accessing counselling were anxiety, family issues, emotional and behavioural difficulties, relationships and friendships, body image, bereavement and self-harm. Of the 186 young people who completed a pre-post counselling questionnaire, 120 reported improved outcomes. What I can tell committee is that the numbers of young people completing pre and post counselling evaluations will increase next year when an agreed framework has been established. 3 evaluation tools were used. The Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, which measures social and emotional wellbeing across all age groups. The YP Core, which is used for secondary aged pupils and is commonly used by counselling providers. And the Stirling Wellbeing Scale, which measures emotional and psychological wellbeing in children aged between 8 and 15. The percentage of reported improved outcomes is detailed in the final 3 bullet points of 7.2, and I'd ask committee again to note that we're moving towards use of a consistent tool in evaluation of impact and outcomes, and that will enable more streamlined reporting in the future. Section 8 and paragraph 8.1 describe our approach to the future allocation of resources and details that future allocations will be formula-based and take account of school role, SIMD, the rural dimension and FME. Paragraph 8.2 describes how work will take place to identify specialised counselling providers for children and young people with additional support needs. And 8.3 and 8.4 give some detail in relation to the Blues programme, which represents an early intervention approach, and Together All, which has been mentioned before at committee, an online moderated mental health support service for 16 to 19-year-olds. Paragraph 10 details the financial implications, and particularly that South Lanarkshire has been allocated $962,000 this financial year, and that services will be procured in line with the requirements of the Procured Service Arrangement for Educational Services Framework, with an associated scheme of delegation, and in line with the requirements of the Council's financial regulations. Turning back then to the recommendations detailed at 2, committee is asked to approve the following: that progress on the provision of counselling through primary, secondary and special schools be noted, and that the content of the further guidance documents also be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anne, for taking us through that. Got a couple of people with questions just now. I'll have Councillor Hamilton, followed by Councillor Mars.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the report, Anne. It's really useful and interesting. I was just wondering, 2 minutes to get the faffing about, we try to get the report up. So I was just wondering at 7.2, when it say the second bullet point, it says that 60% of the people who used it identified as female and 30% identified as males. I was just wondering if there was any work being done around getting more males to use the service, because obviously we know that that certain, and not saying that it would. There needs to be a whole approach to things, but we know that males are more likely not to talk about their emotional needs, and suicide in that age group of males is higher. So I was just wondering if there was any work being done to get males to identify and use the service more.
Thanks, Councillor. You're right, you've made the point. Typically, males are less prone to move forward into a kind of talking therapy service, and we know that across society. We see the amount of work being done actually by football, team, trying to promote talk about mental health. We see it on TV. Within a school setting, again, that's something that's incorporated into the curriculum, the PSE curriculum as well. So obviously school staff are aware that this isn't an area that young males in particular might be comfortable in approaching. The fact that 30% have identified as males, including transgender, that's a positive. I think it's a positive rate. But in terms of the evaluation, that would be something that our psychological service and the QIO and school staff will be mindful of. What I would say is that the service is promoted across schools, and obviously school staff they'll have personal relationships with young people and will be able to sort of target and encourage appropriately based on individual need. There is There are other services, and you'll be aware of these, Councillor Hamilton. Obviously, there are other services in schools as well. And the point was made in the course of the paper that it's absolutely vital that the service identified is done in consultation with the young person. So where a young male might be reluctant to step forward for a one-to-one counselling session, the expectation would be that the named person in the school would be identifying another appropriate and more maybe palatable support for a young person at that particular point in time. So we do look across the continuum of supports that are available.
Thanks very much, Anne. Thank you. We'll have Councillor, Councillor Marrs, you've just disappeared off my list. I'm not sure. Your hand go back down? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sorry, I was going to say that Councillor Hamilton's raised my point. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Razak, please.
Thank you, Chair. The council is invaluable, especially with COVID and everything else that's been happening, and it should be really welcomed. The question I have, and I'll probably have a supplementary for this, is there a waiting list for the use of the service?
No, we don't operate a waiting list. We're very clear about that with our schools. So where schools might have a preferred provider in that they might use commonly one particular counsellor or counselling service, if that counsellor's caseload is full and they have young people who have indicated an interest in counselling, they come back to the centre and we put them in the direction of another counsellor. So we're quite clear with our schools, there is no waiting list for our counselling services. If a young person indicates they need it, they get it. They might not get the counsellor typically aligned to the school, but we will source another provider for that young person.
Okay, supplementary?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. That's just I'm getting a mixed message because a parent's been telling me that they've been on the waiting list, and that's the reason I had asked for this. So I'll go back to them. Then I'll just contact yourselves directly about this then.
If you would do that, that would be really helpful, Councillor. If you can just give us the details, then we can follow that one up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mo. Thank you, everybody. If there's no further comments or questions on this, we agree to accept the report. Okay, right, moving on then, we have a bit of an echo. Thank you, everybody. I'll move on to item 14 then, which is Curriculum for Excellence Review 2020-2021. Begins on page 95 in your pack, and Stuart Nicholson is going to take us through this. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report is to provide an update on the independent review of Curriculum for Excellence by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD as it's known. Curriculum for Excellence, as we know, has been developed and embedded in Scotland's curriculum over the past 15 years or so. A previous review of the broad general education element was undertaken by the OECD in 2015. And in 2019, the then Cabinet Secretary commissioned a further review of the senior phase element of Curriculum for Excellence. As you can see in 3.2, in January 2020, the Scottish Parliament called for that review to be extended to cover all of the CAA Curriculum for Excellence, which would include the broad general education, the senior phase, and indeed the articulation between them. And that provided an opportunity really to consider how Curriculum for Excellence should evolve over the next 10 years or more too. So Section 4 sets out the guiding principles and the aims of the review, primarily to consider how that policy is being implemented across the education system, with a focus on the benefit for learners by looking at curriculum design and implementation, by identifying what's working well with a view to capitalising on those aspects, and also identifying areas and issues that require further attention to ensure that the curriculum is able to do the job that we intend it to do. 4.1 and 4.2 note that the views of young people were given particular prominence and that the views of stakeholders and practitioners were also given consideration. Section 5 then sets out the scope, noting that progress with the findings of the 2015 review, the BGE review at that time, was also considered along with the 6 areas noted in para 5.2, and you can see that they cover some big questions. Section 6 really looks at how they went about finding the answers to those questions, and the OECD were invited to take the lead, having a breadth of international experience and international data to draw upon, as well as prior experience of the Scottish system and knowledge of the Scottish system. As well as the international team, a national stakeholders panel, the Scottish Practitioner Forum, was also established at the OECD's request, and you may well be aware that our own Executive Director was appointed to chair that panel. Section 7 references the deliverables, most notably the report, which was published in published in June this year, and a link to that report is included in 7.2. Section 8 summarises the key findings, and further detail is provided in Appendix 1. The report notes that the curriculum is still seen as bold, as widely supported, and that it offers flexibility, but it does identify issues such as coherence of the policy environment and the need for more structured implementation for the long term. In specific terms, the report identifies the need for balance and consistency, with a particular focus on the role of the senior phase. It also makes recommendations relating to the institutions and the alignment of the institutional processes around qualifications, inspections and the curriculum itself, the policy environment. It's been announced that Scottish Government accepts in full the recommendations of the report and has already announced both the reform of Education Scotland, essentially the separation of the inspection function from the policy development function, and the replacement of the SQA as a qualifications body, and we absolutely recognise the link between that and to the paper that I delivered earlier, and certainly the implications moving forward. And as I stated earlier, Plan 9.5, it notes that the government has appointed Professor Ken Muir, who is formerly Chief Executive of the General Teaching Council for Scotland, and Ken Muir will lead the work on how a number of those recommendations will be implemented, and he will work with an advisory panel with a view to consulting on the design of any new agencies. So can I refer committee back to Section 2 and ask that the contents of this report on the review of Curriculum for Excellence by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development following the review exercise and the next steps be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stuart, for going through that. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this just now? Oh, Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Chair. Stuart, very positive report is delivered, but if you look at the key findings, we're always told when we look at the reports from schools that the word we like to see most is continue, because that suggests that what we're doing is correct. There is very little in that key findings that says continue. It says the balance for curriculum for education needs to be fully beneficial, suggesting that it's not. We have to reassess the CFEs, find a better balance, adapt to senior phase. Yes, continue building capacity, ensure stable, revised division. There's not much there. There's a lot there that says that it's not working properly. And I think it then comes back to the first point. It is not universally accepted as being a very good way forward. I think we actually need to realise that Curriculum for Excellence is not working and we're needing to make significant changes. And perhaps that explains why we're going down in world terms, the standard of our education. Is there any plans within education to address these issues that have been identified by this report?
Thank you, Councillor. I think Tony McDade wants to come in there. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Councillor Allison will realise I come in at this point and disagree with them. Normally, just around the standard for our children and young people locally, I do accept the reality of the situation is what the review talks about is it says that the Curriculum for Excellence continues to be bold and aspirational. It's not, and I spoke at length with the OECD team, and what they meant by that is they do believe that there was an ambition around the learning and teaching. They could see it right through the primary sector. They could see it into lower secondary school. They could see the kind of activity. But what they said, and indeed the second part of the OECD, which is a desktop review by Professor Stobart, is out today, and it basically says you've got very traditional qualifications, and that's for a discussion. There are merits in the kinds of qualifications that you have. But what it is saying is that that's what they mean by the misalignment. So you have a model that looks around 4 capacities, but what we continue to do, although we've tried to get better at it, is that we continue to measure successful learning within the 4 capacities, and a very specific example of successful learning, i.e. the kinds of narrow-based traditional qualifications. Now, of course, it has its place. What the review will do, hopefully, Councillor Allison, is to make sure that it looks at the best bits that are working, because I would contend when we go into our schools, we see we do see children that are able to articulate a view of the world, that they are able to discuss their own learning, and indeed that was reflected in the panel itself. I do believe that you will also see, we have seen improvements in attainment. I think there is a recognition. You need to try to look at the international comparison, and we need to look at why that's happening as well. So I would say that it's not a fully bleak picture. I would say there's been lots of tremendous focus on learning and teaching. The issue that we have is that misalignment between what happens in the senior phase and the broad general education. And I hope the kind of quality of discussion that we have here allows more light, which is what we do, than sometimes the national debate that has heat, and we never really get to discuss these issues in a way in which we can then come together to decide on what the most appropriate qualifications pathway is.
Thank you very much, Tony. Does anyone have any further comments or questions? Councillor Thompson.
Thanks very much, Chair. With your indulgence, I don't know if it's relevant to this. I think it is. It's just that I say this on many occasions, and I'm going to say it once more if you don't mind. It's just my ambition that no matter what political group or what it costs, I hope that one day we see all pupils in Scotland at 16 leave school incompetent in arithmetic, English and maths. Apologies to the hospital for me back. Thanks for letting me do that, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. And I think as we've demonstrated many times before in the committee, there's a real shared commitment to the future of our young people and their achievements going forward. This is undoubtedly something we'll come back to. You'll see from 9.2 and 9.3, there's parts in the report as well talking about further work that's going to happen. So we will have updates and further discussion at committee on this another time as well. If there's no one else just now, we're happy to accept the report as it is.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, we're on to item 15, which begins on page 105, which is on enabling youth voice. And Anne Donaldson is going to take us through this. Thanks again, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise members of the steps being taken to further engage with young people across South Lanarkshire, to empower and enable them to have a voice and to help inform and influence the democratic process. Section 3 offers the background to the report, and members will be aware that South Lanarkshire has a long, positive and proven history of youth engagement and participation, directing a youth strategy and action plan under the governance of the Youth Partnership Board, also known as the Corporate Connections Board. There are two proposals in the paper designed to further enhance the approach to enabling youth voice in South Lanarkshire. The first is a digital proposal and is outlined in Section 4. Paragraph 4.1 describes how, following a range of consultation focus groups with young people, an outcome was the creation of a YFCL digital participation tool. In essence, this would be an app, and as described in paragraph 4.3, it would build on the increased engagement with YFCL using digital media that was experienced and was very successful throughout lockdown. Paragraph 433 describes how, by expanding the delivery model of the Youth Participation Network to the digital sphere, a greater and more diverse range of participants can be engaged. And 4.4 describes how a new development within Young Scot provides a good opportunity and a viable solution to the development of an app at local level. Section 5 outlines the second element of the proposal, and paragraph 5.1 describes how 6 modern apprenticeship posts would be established to progress implementation of the digital solution. In addition, the modern apprentices would move from community to community and experience the breadth of the demands of CLD work across the whole council area. And 5.7 describes how they'll be in a position to take the lead in community planning consultation activity, facilitating conversations and developing skills in a range of approaches. 5.8 offers further detail in relation to the level of skills and experience of people expected to apply for such posts. Sections 6 and 7 consider strategic links and reporting back into the organisation via the Corporate Connections Board and the expected positive outcomes that the development of a digital participation tool and establishment of 6 modern apprenticeship posts will bring. And I would ask members to note that there are no additional costs associated with these proposals. Turning back then to the recommendations detailed at 2, The committee is asked to approve that the steps being taken to further engage with young people, to empower and enable them to have a voice, and to use this to help inform and influence the democratic process be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anne. I've got Councillor Mars, please.
Thank you, Chair. I very much welcome this report as a member, but also as the Chair of the Corporate Connections Board. And I think this paper details really well the work of the administration from the first announcement of what was then called a Youth Cabinet in 2018 as a legacy of the Year of the Young People. And since then, consultation with young people has resulted in an evolution of that policy of a cabinet, and going further and wider and hearing the views across South Lanarkshire in a way that young people wish to be consulted in. And through the posts that will be created, we'll be able to hear that voice loud and clear, and entirely in a way that is youth-led, and young people driving the engagement meaningfully and holistically. And this new outcome reaches young people in a way I don't think seen before in local authority, and I look forward to evolving and growing along the needs of young people and their communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Councillor. It's really exciting times. It really is, and look forward to hearing more about it. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'll make this brief. South Lanarkshire, the old district that had been back in 1973, formed a school and a school council that met at the county buildings. A guy called Mr. Butterfield, the head teacher from, I think it was the grammar, and my old friend and old councillor colleague Tommy Gilligan were on board, and I was delighted to be invited on that, the first young person. So I've been involved, and I know how important it is to young people and how important a contribution they can make. So thank you, Chair. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Bert. Thank you. There's no further questions on this just now, I don't think. So thank you very much for the report, Anne, and good luck to the 6 people who are going to be taking up the modern apprenticeship post as well. I think it's a very exciting development, and look forward to hearing more about it at another point. We're happy to accept the report as is.
Agreed.
Thank you, everyone. Moving on, final item for business just now is item 16. This is on page 111 of your pack. And this is a COVID-19 update for this month, and Des Dixon's going to take us through this. Good morning, Des.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thanks very much. The last paper, COVID-19, but I'd want to put this into context of what you've heard this morning. Our schools are up, back and operational, and look at the wonderful things that they're doing in terms of learning. So my role this morning is to give you a wee update in terms of where we are with public health. So the purpose of the report this morning is to provide the Education Committee with an update on the public health guidance, which came into effect at the start of the new term in August. And that was to support a safe return for staff and pupils, and obviously a safe return for learning. But interestingly, with COVID case numbers being at their highest daily figures, it perhaps is worth highlighting to committee this morning that overall, schools in themselves are regarded by public health professionals as safe environments. And why is that? It's because there's still a range of mitigating factors in place, such as infection control, the enhanced cleaning, the physical distancing, the wearing of masks, and the restrictions that still are in place with regards to parents visiting schools at the moment. So while society is getting back to some degree of normality, these restrictions are still in place to mitigate. So in paragraph 4, we provide an insight into the new guidance, and the committee is asked to note that local authorities were asked by the Scottish Government to adopt a precautionary stage approach to the removal of the mitigations at the start of the new term. And for a 6-week period, this will come under review. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we're still asking staff and their senior pupils to undertake twice-weekly testing or LFD tests. Bubbles no longer in schools are no longer required, but the physical distancing of 1 metre is in place, and we've encouraged our schools through good practice, it was evident before, to try and maintain 2 metres wherever possible. In paragraph 4.5, we describe the change to the self-isolation rules, with whole classes no longer needing to self-isolate should there be a case. Further details on the new rules are provided in the public health letter at Appendix 1. And previously we issued this letter to all elected members because it was a change and to recognise that change. And perhaps worth highlighting at paragraph 7 is ventilation. You will see that in the media, you will see that through our trade union partners, an important aspect. So with the support of Housing and Technical Resources, all schools are this week beginning to receive the CO2 monitors well ahead of the planned schedule in October, and these will be placed in learning areas and there will be monitoring undertaking over that period of time. So it's worth perhaps maybe just trying to reassure our colleagues who work in our schools, who work in our nurseries or education services, that ventilation, infection controls, self-isolation protocols are all being put into practice in the knowledge that they will be under review after 6 weeks' time. So finally, Chair, I think it goes without saying that the duty of care we have for our children, young people and our staff in our schools is really at the heart of what we do, and we say that quite passionately. It is equally important, I think, for all of us, because we've all had to do this, is to adapt. And our head teachers and our staff, in partnership with our trade unions and professional associations, continue to do a really amazing job in these circumstances. And just as a highlight, even you heard this morning, we heard about the summer programme. I think I would like to personally commend those staff and indeed the young people in those environments, in the hubs as we called them, because they applied the protocols and we had very little cases. We did have some, but the protocols were applied. So it was about doing the right thing. So, Chair, the committee is asked to approve the recommendations in paragraph 2 this morning, where we note that the Scottish Government guidance to support a safe return to school for children, young people and staff be noted, that the changes to the self-isolation rules, as highlighted in the paragraph 2, are noted, and that the efforts of staff in schools and educational settings to adapt to the changing guidance and in being agile to respond to these changes whilst ensuring the safety and well-being of children and young people be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Des, and for your comments as well. And I think the flexibility and ongoing resilience of all of the staff in our schools and establishments and young people themselves is absolutely to be commended as we start to move through this next phase and remain adaptable to whatever is going to come at us. Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Nayland, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the update. It's reassuring, as always, that we're doing our best for the young people and people that work in the schools. My question is, we already have a vaccination programme in schools. In fact, my daughter's recently been offered the flu vaccine. Question is, are there any plans for a COVID vaccination programme being rolled out in schools should it be deemed appropriate to vaccinate the younger children en masse? And if so, are we ready to roll the vaccination programme out rapidly? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor, and it's an excellent question. I'll use my phrase to try and give you as much reassurance as possible. We are and have, and Tony and I certainly met the medical director recently, and it is around looking at the preventative measures. So clearly, the JCVI have still got decisions to make around the vaccination of young people. But if and when that changes or a decision is made around that, our schools and ourselves will be supporting health to roll that out. Perhaps you raise a very good question about, that was vaccinations, about mitigation. You may wish to know that in terms of the flu vaccination, which is carried out in schools, it's been done in the month of September. I'm pleased to say that Health have agreed that we'll also undertake the flu vaccination of staff at the same time as they're doing young people in the establishment, which I think I'm sure you'll welcome yourself. So yes, we'll keep a watching brief on that, Councillor Naylor, and we'll be ready to support Health as we move forward in that one.
Thank you, Des. Okay, Lynn. Okay, there's no further comments or questions on this just now. We're happy to accept the report.
Great, Chair.
Okay, I have no items of urgent business, everyone. So that is us for today's committee. Thank you again for all of your contributions and your questions and your input today and for your attendance.
Thanks, Chair.